To work in a Node project, we first have to understand how the module system work. We bring in a module dependency using an import line. For example, say that we have a config module somewhere. We require it with the import config line. This syntax, however, looks for config as either a core module or an npm installed module in Node modules. If we want to place our config.js file somewhere else, we can use a relative path in the string here. For example, /config tells Node to look for config.js on the same level as the current file. We can also use .. to go up one level if you want to. Let's create a config.js file here on the same level as server.js and put a simple console.log line in here. Since we're using the new import syntax, we need to use Babel node here to test the server. But we only installed Babel node locally, not globally. It's available under /node modules.bin Babel node, and we can invoke it from there directly. However, instead of using the .bin path like this, we can actually make /node modules/.bin part of the global path variable. All we need is to edit the bash profile file. This is on Mac though, so on Windows things will be different. And we want to export path to be the current path, adding /node modules/.bin, just like that. This is a relative path, so when we go to any Node project, the node modules.bin folder will be included in the global path, which is really handy. To reload this file, close and open the terminal. And now Babel node should be available directly here thanks to the relative path we just added. No need to install a global binary. All import calls are cached. This means if we re-import the config, we're not really evaluating the config file content again. It will just be read from the cache. This is why it's okay to import the same file multiple times from multiple other files because the cache will be used after the first import. It's important to understand that every module gets its own private scope. So defining a top-level variable here, for example, env is process.env, this does not mean that we're putting the variable env on the global scope, unlike a browser environment. So if I try to console log env in server.js, this will not work because env is undefined on server.js. It's defined in config.js. So with Node modules, we don't have to wrap things in an IIFE to get a new scope. Node actually does the wrapping for us automatically, which is neat. Let's clean that up. I'm actually going to remove the console log line. And let's actually make this into a constant because I'm not going to be changing it. Usually, when we import something, we import it into a variable, just like this. And let me go ahead and console log config. So right now, this config is actually an empty object because we have not exported anything in config.js. So let's go ahead and export something. When we import with this syntax, we're importing the default exported object in the config module. For example, let's export default object with a port property. And let's make this property reads from env.port and default to 8080. This way we can control the port from the process, but we don't have to. Now our import from line places the default export into the config variable, so we can read the port property from the server.js file. We can also export other things beside the default object. For example, let's export a constant, node env, set that to env.node_env, and default to development. To import a non-default export, we need to use the destructure syntax, node env. And let's go ahead and console log that as well. And there you go. We can also export functions like this log star here. When we import the function, we also need to destructure this because it's not a default export. We can simply invoke the logstar variable because it holds a function reference.